Incidentally, this piece of land is immediately across the street from the piece of land, not the building, rents for $48 million a year. It's the most valuable piece of San Francisco. Immediately across the street was a piece of land, smaller, and with a limit on how high it could go, because San Francisco building code says that you have to be able to see the cathedral from that intersection, so the building can't go up any higher than it is.
Oh, wow.
So for that reason, this piece of land is worth less than if you said you could go up 20 stories. Because you can't build as high, the land's not worth as much. But nevertheless, this land is immediately across the street from the most valuable piece of San Francisco. The question is, I put to you, how could a desirable piece of land be an empty space for 35 years? Why would a valuable piece of land be unused? The explanation is simple, actually. There are 3 ways to make a living in this world, and only 3 ways to make a living. You can do stuff, you can make stuff, and you can own the earth. Those are the only 3 ways to make a living. I'm a teacher, I don't make stuff, I just do stuff. Somebody else makes hydrants, makes sidewalks, makes automobiles, bicycles, what have you. You can do a combination of these, of course. That's another way to make a living. And the third way is to own a piece of land, get $48 million a year and rent it to somebody who's willing to put up a building, right? That's another way to do it. Each of those 3 categories, goods, services, and land, are taxed all around the world at about the same rate. Pretty similar. There are exceptions, but that's what they are, exceptions. Which of those 3 categories do you suppose is taxed at the lowest rate relative to the other 2? Land.
Land.
So if you are a major investor, do you invest in goods, services, or land? You invest in land, right? Because there's low tax on it. It just makes sense. Who's going to, money goes where it's going to be the least attacked, right? Investment. So that's in fact what Donald Trump does. The only piece of San Francisco that Donald Trump owns is this. He gets $48 million a year from San Franciscans, despite calling him misogynist, racist, a meanie, a baddie, stupid. Yes, it's the only piece of San Francisco. Yeah. At present, there's a small tax on the building and a smaller tax on land. Why was this piece of land still worth about $3 million a year, not developed? There was a $50,000 a year tax on it, so the owner made a decision to, rather than employ it, to keep it empty. Why was that? Speculation, waiting for its price to go up. Using the game of Monopoly to illustrate. Let's imagine that we are playing the game of Monopoly, and we agree before the game begins that none of us can build on this side of the game board. It's off limits. What does making this off limits do to the desirability, the price of the rest of the game board? That's what happens by not using desirable land, is it creates higher value of land before it naturally would go up. And the owner of this land does own other land, and saw an increase in income of over $500,000 in other land by not using this land. Now, that isn't to say that everybody who speculates in land makes money by doing so. But on average, yes, or this phenomena would not happen. Statistically, the underuse of desirable land results in fake scarcity. Not fake news, fake scarcity. That results in higher prices. So San Francisco and California, one reason it has high real estate values is because a lot of land is not being used. It's created scarcity. It was a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice not to use it. That results in a number of things. One, if the price of land goes up, people have to pay more to live in San Francisco than they otherwise would. Two, if they don't want to pay that higher price, the only way they can afford to live here is to live in smaller space. So Chinatown is the second densest neighborhood in the United States. How? How many tall buildings are there in Chinatown? None. Where are the people living? 3 families to a 1-bedroom apartment. That's how they're doing it. I'm not saying that all is all over, but that's a lot of what's happening. And the other way that use of land results in is the price of land goes up, people have to pay more, or they live in smaller apartments, or the price of land, or people live out here. So they have to live further away from where they want to live. The Marriott workers, they have to live an hour and a half away from where they work. They can't afford to live here, and they're not willing to live in tiny apartments, say. They have a family, so that's not going to happen. So they live out here. What George proposed was a tax equal to the annual value of location, location, location. So again, this is worth about $3 million a year. The tax is $100,000 a year. If the tax were $3 million a year, the owner would maximize the use of this site. And it was unused for, as I say, 35 years. How it would have been built on immediately had the owner had no expectation of deriving any income from the location in the future. Another example is right here. This 5-story building has now been empty for 8 years.
Which one?
Yes. The tax on that building is $28,000 a year, but the site is worth $1 million a year. So George proposed $1 million tax. What would you do? You'd build up as quickly as you could, you'd fill it up, and instead of people being pushed out here, an hour and a half away from San Francisco, there'd be living space in San Francisco. And if there's more housing, what happens to the price of housing? It goes down, right?
Yep.
The more you produce of something, the lower its price eventually will become. Well, that's what George proposed. And no tax on the building owner. At present, we tax the person who builds it, and we tax the person who's in it, and we tax the person who maintains it. And George said, why would you penalize? Why would you tax somebody for producing the stuff you want? And why would you not tax the person who's keeping you from using the earth? The Marriott workers, all they're asking for is a little raise in their wages. They're not asking for the land underneath the Marriott Hotel. That's what they should be asking for. And they should be asking for the land underneath Donald Trump's building. But they're not. But if in that moment that individual could say to another person, you still have to pay me to use this earth, that's not justice. As long as one person has to pay another person to use this earth, that's not justice. Not for the housing. I'm not speaking of paying for the housing, not paying for the goods and services, but paying to be on planet Earth.